You feel the marble beneath your knees. It's cold, polished smooth by 1,000 prostrations before yours. Before we descend further into this impossible world, I'd love to know. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It amazes me that we can gather from opposite ends of the earth to unravel the same dark chapter of history, connected by nothing but curiosity and the stubborn human need to understand how power can warp a soul beyond recognition. The young emperor watching you from his throne is Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. History knows him by the nickname soldiers gave him as a child, Caligula, Little Boots. He's 23 years old, blessed with the face of a Greek statue, and cursed with appetites that will make even Rome, a civilization built on conquest and blood, recoil in horror. When he ascended to power 2 years earlier, the empire exhaled in relief. The old emperor Tiberius, paranoid and cruel, had finally died. This golden boy, son of the beloved general Germanicus, would restore Rome's glory. The Senate declared public thanksgiving. Citizens celebrated in the streets. For 7 months it seemed their prayers had been answered. Then Caligula fell ill. Palace physicians recorded the fever that seized him in October of 38 AD, a mysterious affliction that left him bedridden for weeks, thrashing in silk sheets, speaking to presences no one else could see. When he finally rose from that sickbed, something fundamental had shifted behind his eyes. Courtiers noticed it first. The way his gaze would fix on empty air during Senate meetings, his lips forming words in conversation with invisible companions. Guards reported hearing laughter from his chambers at odd hours, his voice and only his voice, as if the gods themselves were sharing jokes that mortal ears couldn't perceive. What emerged from that illness wasn't madness in any simple sense. Caligula remained lucid, articulate, frighteningly intelligent in his manipulations. But the boundaries that separate human from divine, public from private, political authority from sexual dominance, those dissolved completely. He began to speak of himself not as a man blessed by gods, but as a god walking among men. And gods, he reasoned with chilling logic, are not bound by human laws, not even the laws governing their own bodies, their own desires, their own sisters. Drusilla was the middle of his 3 sisters. Neither the eldest nor the youngest, but the one whose presence seemed to calm the strange static that crackled through Caligula's increasingly erratic moods. Roman historians, writing with the careful circumlocution required when discussing imperial taboos, recorded that the emperor's affection for Drusilla exceeded what nature permitted between siblings. They had been intimate, these sources whispered, even before his ascension to power. Even before illness transformed preference into obsession. When she died suddenly in 38 AD, possibly from fever, though some suspected poison, Caligula's grief shattered what remained of his restraint. He declared Drusilla a goddess. Temples rose in her honor across the empire, staffed by priests who offered prayers to her deified image. But the public rituals were merely theater. Palace servants, bound by fear into silence, reported what happened in the imperial apartments after her death. Caligula would spend hours in her former chambers, arranging her jewelry with meticulous care, holding conversations with her gowns as they hung lifeless in cedar wardrobes. He described his daily decisions to her cosmetics, seeking counsel from pots of rouge and kohl as if her spirit resided in these intimate objects that had once touched her skin. More disturbing still were the whispers about what happened before her funeral. Multiple sources, though writing decades later and trading in rumor as much as fact, claimed that Caligula delayed Drusilla's burial, conducting private ceremonies with her body that blurred the boundary between religious devotion and something far darker. He anointed her corpse with oils worth a senator's annual income, recited love poetry while priests waited outside locked doors, treated her death not as an ending but as a transformation into a more permanent form of possession. This is where Caligula's rituals truly begin, not with political calculation or mere hedonism, but with genuine belief that he had transcended human categories entirely. A god could love his sister as a wife. A god could commune with the dead. A god could demand that others participate in rituals that transformed governance itself into an extension of imperial desire. He started with the Senate's wives. Picture the scene. You're a senator's wife summoned to the palace for what was announced as a diplomatic dinner. You arrive in your finest stola, your hair arranged by skilled slaves into the elaborate coiffure Roman respectability demands. The dining couches are arranged in traditional fashion. The wine is Falernian. The first course is dormice in honey. Everything appears normal until Caligula gestures lazily toward a golden statue of himself, positioned at the room's center. It stands 7 feet tall, naked, anatomically precise. He instructs you to approach it, to kneel, to recite prayers typically offered to Venus, goddess of sexual love, but directed toward his golden image. Your husband, reclining on a couch 10 feet away, continues discussing grain shipments with another senator. His voice steady, his eyes fixed on the middle distance, pretending with desperate conviction that nothing unusual is occurring. This is the trap Caligula perfected, forcing Rome's elite to participate in their own humiliation while maintaining the fiction of normalcy. The psychological violence was more devastating than physical coercion. He understood intuitively what modern psychologists would later document, that forcing someone to perform degrading acts while pretending they're voluntary creates deeper trauma than simple assault. By requiring senators to continue political conversations while their wives were displayed and fondled like objects, he transformed every man in that room into a collaborator in his own cuckolding, bound by shared shame into permanent silence. The dinners escalated. Women were seated at Caligula's feet like pets, required to remain motionless while he discussed tax policy with their husbands. Some were ordered to serve wine topless, their humiliation seasoned with the pretense that this was merely an eccentric imperial preference, rather than systematic degradation. Marcus Lepidus, married to Caligula's sister Agrippina, endured dinner after dinner, watching the emperor fondle his wife during discussions of military campaigns, her gasps punctuating debates about Germanic tribal movements. Lepidus would later join the conspiracy to assassinate Caligula, but for months he sat frozen in place, his jaw muscles working as he chewed invisible leather, performing the fiction that politics and sexual domination occupied separate spheres. They didn't. Not anymore. Caligula had discovered something that would echo through every subsequent dictatorship. Absolute power finds its purest expression not in controlling what people do, but in controlling what they pretend not to see. He extended this principle to religious ceremony with innovations that shocked even Rome's jaded priesthood. Traditional emperor worship maintained careful distance. You honored the emperor's genius, his divine essence, not the man himself. Caligula obliterated this distinction. He ordered temples throughout the empire to replace statues of Jupiter with images of himself, commissioned with interchangeable heads so his divine appearance could be updated seasonally. In his private apartments, he constructed shrines where he conducted conversations with statues of gods, arguments and negotiations that guards reported hearing from both sides, as if divine voices only he could perceive were responding to his demands. These religious innovations merged seamlessly with sexual ritual. During ceremonies honoring his own godhood, Caligula would require aristocratic families to participate in rites that combined traditional prayers with acts of sexual submission. A documented ritual from 39 AD involved the wife of Senator Marcus Brutus, forced to disrobe before a golden statue of the emperor while reciting hymns to Venus. Her nakedness transformed into religious offering, her humiliation sanctified by imperial decree. The genius of this approach was its ambiguity. Was she being sexually exploited or performing religious devotion? The answer, terrifyingly, was both simultaneously. His relationship with his favorite horse, Incitatus, became another vehicle for rituals that blurred every boundary Roman society recognized. History remembers the story that Caligula threatened to make his horse a consul, a tale so absurd it's often dismissed as propaganda. But palace servants reported something stranger and more disturbing. Elaborate marriage ceremonies between emperor and animal, complete with exchanged vows and wedding feasts where Incitatus was hand-fed delicacies while Caligula delivered speeches about their eternal love. These ceremonies typically concluded with Caligula engaging in sexual acts in the horse's presence, apparently believing Incitatus served as witness to his divine virility. a sacred observer whose animal nature made it more trustworthy than any human confidant. He constructed sleeping quarters adjacent to the horse's stable, spent nights curled against the animal while discussing state secrets he trusted to no human advisor. The psychological logic becomes clear when you understand Caligula's childhood. His father, Germanicus, died under suspicious circumstances when he was 7, probably poisoned by imperial rivals. His mother, Agrippina, spent years imprisoned, eventually starved to death. Young Gaius survived by learning to trust no one, reading every human interaction as potential betrayal. The horse couldn't betray him. The horse couldn't plot assassination. In Incitatus, Caligula found the only relationship in his world uncorrupted by the poison of politics. But human relationships, those he transformed into theaters of cruelty, with genuinely creative brutality. He commissioned writers to create elaborate scripts for scenarios involving specific senators and their families, then required these individuals to perform their assigned roles while he watched and pleasured himself. These weren't simple humiliations, but full theatrical productions with complex plots involving betrayal, reconciliation, and degradation, performances that could last hours. Senator Lucius Vitellius and his wife Plaudia were forced to enact a scripted dialogue about marital infidelity, gradually removing their clothing and engaging in sexual acts, according to Caligula's detailed stage directions, while the emperor provided running commentary on their technique and emotional authenticity. The sophistication of this cruelty reveals Caligula's understanding of psychological manipulation. He recognized that forcing people to speak scripted lines, expressing enthusiasm for their own degradation, created wounds that outlasted physical violence. By requiring victims to perform as willing participants rather than simple objects of abuse, he made them complicit in their own destruction, transformed them from martyrs into collaborators, ensured their silence through shared shame. His treatment of enemies revealed similar psychological acuity. When Senator Gnaeus Piso was accused of conspiracy in 40 AD, Caligula ordered him brought not to a public execution, but to the Imperial bathhouse. There, surrounded by steam and the echoing acoustics of marble walls, the emperor personally tortured Piso while wearing nothing but gold jewelry and a laurel crown. Witnesses described how Caligula would alternate between inflicting pain and pleasuring himself, as if the senator's suffering and his own arousal were components of a single ritual, each informing and intensifying the other. The message was unmistakable. Even in your final moments, you exist only to serve imperial desire. He extended this principle to gladiatorial games, ordering specific fighters brought to his private viewing box during combat, requiring them to fight while he masturbated mere feet away, their blood and sweat mingling with his sexual excitement. His most notorious innovation involved forcing aristocratic women to fight in the arena, not as professional gladiatrices, but as senators' wives and daughters compelled to face trained killers while wearing minimal armor that emphasized their vulnerability. Caligula would position himself close enough to hear their breathing, see the terror crystallize in their eyes as they faced opponents who had killed dozens of times before. The psychological foundation underlying all this becomes clearer when you trace Caligula's adolescence under Emperor Tiberius, who raised him after his parents' deaths. Tiberius spent his final years in self-imposed exile on Capri, surrounded by rumors of systematic sexual depravity involving children and elaborate torture. The teenage Caligula witnessed and possibly participated in these activities, learning that absolute power meant absolute freedom from moral constraints. Under Tiberius's tutelage, he practiced delivering speeches while young slaves were tortured for his entertainment, learned to associate authority with the infliction of suffering, trained himself to view other humans as objects whose pain existed solely for his edification. When he assumed power at 24, Caligula inherited not just the machinery of Roman government, but a fully formed psychology that viewed sexual domination as the purest expression of political authority. His marriage to Caesonia in 39 AD provided the most sustained glimpse into this worldview. Unlike his previous 3 marriages, brief political arrangements, his relationship with Caesonia lasted until his assassination. She was neither particularly beautiful nor well-connected, leading historians to speculate about what bound them. Contemporary sources describe Caesonia as unusually willing to participate in and encourage Caligula's extremes, helping design humiliation rituals, suggesting scenarios that increased both psychological impact and the emperor's sexual excitement. Their daughter Julia Drusilla, born in 39 AD, became another component of these rituals in ways that horrified even the hardened imperial court. Caligula conducted elaborate ceremonies celebrating the infant's divine nature, holding the naked baby while discussing her future role as goddess and eternal companion. These ceremonies typically concluded with Caligula engaging in sexual acts while holding his daughter, apparently believing her presence blessed and amplified his divine virility. Palace servants reported finding shrines in the imperial nursery where Caligula conducted private worship, combining traditional prayers with sexualized devotions to his infant daughter's supposed divine essence. The conspirators who finally killed him in January 41 AD were not political reformers or Republican idealists. They were Praetorian Guard officers who had spent months forced to witness and protect the emperor during his most extreme moments. Cassius Chaerea, the conspiracy's leader, later testified that the assassination was motivated not by political disagreement, but by the psychological impossibility of continuing to observe behaviors that violated something fundamental in human nature. The attack occurred in a narrow underground passage connecting palace to theater, chosen specifically because it would allow the conspirators to kill Caligula away from the witnesses who had become integral to his sense of power. In the immediate aftermath, the conspirators made an unusual decision. They also killed Caesonia and infant Julia Drusilla, apparently recognizing that Caligula's rituals had created a form of corruption requiring complete elimination rather than mere containment. They beat the baby's head against a wall while Caesonia watched, then killed her too. This systematic destruction of his entire immediate family suggests that contemporaries viewed his sexual behaviors as fundamentally threatening to civilization itself, a contagion requiring violent eradication. Centuries later, tourists walk through the ruins of Caligula's palace complex on the Palatine Hill, photographing marble columns and mosaic floors, mostly unaware of the intimate horrors that transformed these beautiful spaces into theaters of orchestrated cruelty. Archaeologists have excavated the underground passages where he died, the bathhouses where he tortured, the dining halls where senators pretended not to see their wives' degradation. The stones remember what people prefer to forget. What haunts most about Caligula isn't the extremity of his cruelty, but its logic. He understood something that would echo through every subsequent dictatorship, that absolute power finds its ultimate expression not in controlling bodies, but in controlling what people pretend is normal. Every senator who discussed grain prices while his wife was fondled, every aristocrat who scripted enthusiasm for his own humiliation, every guard who stood at attention while witnessing the unspeakable, each became complicit, bound by shame into permanent silence, transformed from victim into collaborator. The marble is still cold beneath countless vanished knees. The throne is empty now, its gold long since melted down and repurposed. But somewhere in the space between those ancient columns, in the silence that follows whispered prayers, the ghost of absolute power still whispers its eternal promise, that those who hold the power of life and death will inevitably discover appetites that no boundary can contain, and that the human capacity for adaptation, for continuing to function while pretending not to see, is itself a kind of madness more terrifying than any emperor's delusions of godhood.